All right, today we're putting on our detective hats. We're diving deep into a single page of the Talmud to solve a legal puzzle about a ritual right at the heart of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. So let's go ahead and open the case file. Our case starts with the offerings at the temple. I want you to picture this scene. You've got the priests, the altar, the animal. Now, one of the most crucial moments is the slaughter itself. So, who gets to do it? Does it have to be a priest or someone special? You'd probably assume it had to be a priest, right? I mean, it makes sense. Well, the real answer is surprisingly open, but as the ancient rabbis dug in, they found out that this simple rule was hiding a really fascinating legal contradiction. Okay, so let's establish the basic facts of the case. We're going to start with the foundational rulebook, a text called the Mishnah. What does it have to say about all this? What's pretty amazing here is just how inclusive this rule is. The Mishnah states, flat out, that the slaughter is valid even if it's done by non-priests, women, slaves, or even people who are considered ritually impure. So, case closed, right? Ha! Not so fast. And this is where the real detective work begins. The next generation of sages, in the text we call the Gemara, they looked at this ruling and they spotted a clue, just a single word, that hinted that this open-door policy wasn't the whole story. The clue was tiny. You could almost miss it. It was hidden in the grammar. The Mishnah says the slaughter is valid for those who slaughtered, that's past tense. Now, why say it like that? Why not just say they may slaughter? This little choice of words implies that, well, maybe the act is valid after it's already done, but it wasn't supposed to happen that way in the first place. This brings us to a really crucial concept in Jewish law, diavad. It literally means after the fact. Think of it this way. Say, someone without a driver's license parks your car perfectly. Now, they shouldn't have done it, but now that it's done, the car is legally parked. The action is valid, but it wasn't the ideal way to get there. And the opposite of diavad is lechatchila, which means from the start. This is the ideal way, the totally prescribed A+ way of doing something. So the question the rabbis were wrestling with was this: is slaughter by a non-priest lechatchila perfectly fine from the get-go, or is it only diavad, valid but only after the fact? That little verb in the Mishnah suggests it's the latter. And this right here illustrates the central conflict perfectly. On one hand, the Mishnah's past tense phrasing implies the act is only valid diavad, after the fact. But Scripture itself seems to say the exact opposite. The book of Leviticus says, he shall slaughter, and the priests shall present the blood, which the rabbis understood to mean that pretty much anyone can do the slaughtering, and only the next steps are for the priests. That scriptural proof suggests it's totally lechatchila, fine from the start. So, which one is it? We have a direct contradiction on our hands. So how do you solve a contradiction like this? Well, the rabbis did what any good detective would do. They decided to isolate one variable. They focused on the most problematic category from that Mishnah's list, the ritually impure person. Maybe, just maybe, they were the reason for all this confusing language. So, here's the first proposed solution. The Mishnah used that weird past tense because of one specific group, ritually impure people. For everybody else on the list, non-priests, women, slaves, it's totally fine from the start. But for an impure person, it's not ideal. And there's a very specific concern for why that is. This all comes down to a really important distinction between two types of law. According to Torah law, that's the scriptural baseline, their slaughter is valid. But the rabbis added a precaution, a rabbinic law, that an impure person shouldn't slaughter from the start, just in case they accidentally touch the flesh of the offering and contaminate it. So the cautious wording was just for them. It seems like a neat solution, right? But it actually opens up an even bigger problem. And here's that problem. The Torah is very clear that the slaughter has to happen before the Lord, which means inside the temple courtyard. But ritually impure people were strictly, absolutely forbidden from entering the temple courtyard. So how could an impure person ever perform the slaughter, even if it's only after the fact? This logistical puzzle led the rabbis to one of the most famous and, frankly, most creative thought experiments in the entire Talmud. How do you perform an action inside a space that you are not allowed to enter? The rule is absolute. An impure person cannot set foot inside that courtyard. It's a fundamental boundary. So it seems like the slaughter is physically and legally impossible for them. But the rabbis found a way. The Gemara comes up with this incredible workaround. An impure person could stand outside the courtyard, use a very, very long knife, and perform the slaughter on the animal, which is inside the courtyard. That way, the person themselves never enters the forbidden space, but the act of slaughter still happens in the correct location. It's just a brilliant piece of legal and logical thinking. But good detectives always test a theory. If you can use a long knife to reach in, why can't you just, reach your hands in for other parts of the ritual, like placing your hands on the animal's head? That also had to happen before the Lord. And the Talmud has an answer for that too. The sages determined that partial entry, even just sticking your hands across the boundary, is legally considered a full entry. A knife is just an external tool, but your body parts, well, that's you. So reaching your hands in is forbidden, but using a long knife is allowed. The logic is just incredibly precise. Just when it seems like we finally have a solution, it's a little strange, it involves a very long knife, but it's a solution, another rabbi, Rav Kista, comes along and just flips the entire investigation completely on its head. Rav Chisda looks at all the same clues, all the same verses, and he asks this disarmingly simple question. What if we've had this whole thing backwards the entire time? Rav Chisda's approach completely reverses the logic. Instead of using the placing of hands rule to understand the rules of slaughter, he does the exact opposite. He argues that since the slaughter itself has to be before the Lord, then it stands to reason that the slaughterer must be ritually pure. And since the Bible links placing hands to slaughter, while that act also requires purity. So what does this do to our really clever workaround? It completely eliminates it. If the slaughterer themselves must be pure enough to be before the Lord, then the whole long knife scenario is irrelevant. An impure person simply cannot perform the act, period. And Rav Kizda has support for this. He cites another sage, Shimon HaTimni, who interpreted that verse, "He shall slaughter the bull before the Lord," to mean that the slaughterer has to be standing before the Lord, meaning inside the courtyard. This interpretation makes the long knife theory impossible and really strengthens the argument that only ritually pure people could do this from the start. And so our detective story ends not with one simple answer, but with this profound ongoing debate. This ancient argument, with its grammatical clues and long knives, it forces us to think so much more deeply. It's a masterclass in the tension between what is technically valid and what is ideally intended, and it asks us to consider, in our own lives, in our own rules and systems, where do we draw the line between what is simply acceptable and what is truly right?